The mahogany conference table reflected the late afternoon sun streaming through the 42nd floor windows as Grant Holloway reviewed the final merger documents. His Montblanc pen moved across the signature pages with practiced precision, each stroke representing another seven-figure deal closed for Morrison, Klein, and Associates. "Congratulations, Grant," said David Morrison, the founding partner. "The Hartwell acquisition is officially complete. That's your 15th major deal this year." Grant's phone buzzed against the polished table. A text from Lydia. "Don't forget, hospital fundraiser tonight. 7 p.m. sharp. Wear the Navy Armani." He typed back quickly, "Closing Hartwell deal. We'll be there." "You better be. The Weatherbys are expecting us at their table. This is important for my reputation." Grant pocketed his phone and shook hands around the room. At 43, he commanded respect in Manhattan's most elite legal circles. His billable hours consistently topped 2,400 annually, making him one of the firm's most valuable partners. The pressure was immense, but so were the rewards. "See you at the charity gala," David said as they packed up. "Lydia's interior design work on our East Hampton house was exceptional. You're lucky to have such a talented wife." Lucky. Grant supposed he was. 18 years of marriage to Lydia had built them an enviable life. Their Tudor mansion in Scarsdale was featured in Architectural Digest. Their daughter Chloe was debate team captain at her prestigious prep school. They moved in circles where charity galas and golf club memberships were simply expected. Grant's chest tightened as he gathered his files. The sharp pain had been happening more frequently during his morning swims at the club. Stress, probably. The hostile takeover season was particularly brutal this year. At home, their housekeeper Rosa was arranging flowers in the foyer. "Mrs. Holloway left for her appointment," she said. "She'll meet you at the event." "What appointment?" Grant asked, loosening his tie. "With the contractor, I think. About the special project." Grant frowned. Lydia had been working with this new contractor, Dominic, for months. Something about renovating their Hampton house, though Grant hadn't seen any actual work being done. Every time he asked for details, Lydia would wave her hand dismissively and mention design consultations and vendor meetings. Upstairs, Grant found Chloe at her desk, surrounded by debate prep materials. "Hey, kiddo, ready for tomorrow's tournament?" "I guess," she said without looking up. "Mom's missing it again." "She has that important client meeting." "She always has important client meetings." Chloe's voice carried a note of frustration that made Grant pause. "She missed the last 3 debates, Dad. But she never misses her Thursday night consultations that run past midnight." Grant sat on the edge of her bed. "Your mother's business is really taking off. She's working with some high-profile clients." "Is that why she has a separate phone now? For vendor communications?" The tightness in Grant's chest returned. He'd noticed the second phone too, along with the credit card charges for lingerie that never seemed to make it home. The late nights that were becoming more frequent. The way Lydia had moved into the guest room, claiming his snoring disturbed her sleep. "Adults sometimes need to keep work and personal life separate," he said finally. Chloe looked at him with eyes too mature for 16. "Dad, when was the last time Mom went to one of my debates?" Grant couldn't remember. The charity gala at the plaza was Manhattan society at its finest. Lydia arrived separately, stunning in a black designer gown that Grant didn't recognize. Her makeup was flawless, her smile radiant as she worked the room. "Darling, you made it," she said, kissing his cheek. Her perfume was different too, heavier, more sensual than her usual subtle fragrance. "New dress?" he asked. "This old thing? I've had it forever." She was already scanning the crowd. "Come on, the Weatherbees are expecting us." Grant felt another sharp pain as they walked toward their table. He should probably schedule that cardiac stress test he'd been putting off. But next quarter was even busier, with 3 major acquisitions in the pipeline. During their annual insurance review the following week, Grant updated their emergency contact information. Lydia was listed as primary contact, his brother Wesley as secondary. "Everything looks good," said their agent. "Though I notice Mrs. Holloway increased your life insurance policy 6 months ago. Good thinking, given your high-stress profession." Grant stared at the form. He didn't remember discussing any insurance increase with Lydia. The cracks in paradise. The fractures in their perfect life became more visible as spring approached. Lydia's absences grew longer and more frequent. Sunday family dinners, once sacred, were regularly interrupted by urgent client needs. "Mom, my debate championship is next week," Chloe announced during one of their rare family breakfasts. "Will you be there?" Lydia didn't look up from her phone. "I'll try, sweetie. I have that big presentation for the Riverside project." "You said you'd try for the last 5 tournaments." "Chloe, don't be dramatic. Mommy's work is very important right now." Grant watched his daughter's face fall. After Lydia left for another client consultation, he found Chloe in her room. "Dad, why doesn't Mom care about my debates anymore?" "She cares, honey. She's just overwhelmed with work. Mrs. Patterson's mom comes to every single tournament, and she's a brain surgeon. Mom designs rooms." The simple truth of it hit Grant hard. He'd been making excuses for Lydia so long that he'd stopped questioning them himself. That weekend, Lydia announced she was attending a design expo in Boston. "It's crucial for my business development," she said, packing an overnight bag with unusual care. After she left, Grant decided to research the expo online. He searched every design conference, trade show, and professional event in Boston that weekend. Nothing matched Lydia's description. When their credit card statement arrived, Grant found charges that made his stomach clench. 2-person dinners at expensive restaurants, a couple's spa treatment, hotel room service for 2. Lydia returned Sunday evening with a new gold bracelet. "It was a sample from one of the vendors," she explained when Grant asked about it. "They're trying to get my business." What vendor gives away $1,000 jewelry as samples? You wouldn't understand the design world, Grant. It's all about relationships. That night, Grant lay awake in the master bedroom while Lydia slept in the guest room. The house felt hollow, like a beautiful facade hiding something rotten underneath. His chest pains were getting worse. Paula, his secretary, had booked him a doctor's appointment twice, and both times he'd canceled for client meetings. The pressure at work was relentless, but at least there he knew the rules. Success was measured in billable hours and closed deals. At home, he felt like he was failing a test he didn't understand. "Why don't you take Chloe college touring while I handle the Hampton house renovation?" Lydia suggested one evening. "She'd love spending time with just you, and I need to supervise the contractors without distractions." Grant agreed, grateful for any excuse to connect with his daughter. But as he watched Lydia make the arrangements, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was managing him, moving him around like a piece on a chessboard. The night before they were scheduled to leave for college visits, Grant found Lydia packing another overnight bag. "I thought you were staying in Scarsdale while we're gone." "Change of plans. Dominic needs me on site for the major renovations. I'll be staying at the Hampton house all week. Grant almost asked to see photos of the renovation progress, but something in Lydia's expression stopped him. The way she looked at him lately, with barely concealed impatience as if he were an inconvenience she had to manage. Instead, he kissed her goodbye and told her he loved her. She turned her cheek at the last second, so his lips brushed her ear instead of her mouth. "Drive safely," she said, already reaching for her phone as he walked away. Code Blue. Thursday, March 14th. Started like any other high-pressure day. Grant arrived at the office by 6:30, diving into preparation for the quarterly partners meeting. The Hartwell acquisition had been a major win, but David Morrison was already pushing for even bigger targets. "Coffee, Mr. Holloway?" Paula asked, bringing him his usual double espresso. "Make it a triple today," Grant said, rubbing his chest. The tightness had started during his morning swim and hadn't eased. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." "Just tired. Long week." By lunch, Grant had consumed 4 cups of coffee and was reviewing contracts for 3 simultaneous deals. The firm's biggest clients expected results, and Grant delivered. That's why his corner office overlooked Central Park, and his bonus could buy small countries. At 1:30, he joined the working lunch meeting in Conference Room A. The mahogany table was covered with documents, laptops, and the remains of overpriced sandwiches. 5 senior associates hung on his every word as he dissected the Morrison Industries deal. "The key is timing," Grant explained, pointing to a clause in the acquisition agreement. "If we can expedite the regulatory approvals..." The pain hit like lightning. Sharp, crushing pressure that radiated from his chest down his left arm. Grant gripped the table edge, gasping, "Mr. Holloway?" Trevor, the newest associate, jumped up. "Are you okay?" Grant tried to speak but couldn't form words. The room spun violently. He felt himself falling, heard the crash of his chair hitting the floor, but seemed to experience it from a great distance. "Call 911, Trevor shouted. "Now!" "I can't breathe," Grant managed to whisper. Trevor knelt beside him, phone already dialing. "Stay with me, Mr. Holloway. Help is coming." The pain was unlike anything Grant had ever experienced. It felt like an elephant sitting on his chest, crushing the life out of him. He could hear Trevor giving their address to the emergency operator, hear the panic in his voice. 43-year-old male, possible heart attack, conscious but in severe distress. Someone tried calling Lydia. Grant heard the distant ringing through Trevor's phone speaker, then silence. No answer. The paramedics arrived at 2:52 p.m., led by a calm woman with kind eyes and steady hands. "Sir, I'm Sarah. We're going to take good care of you. Can you tell me your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10? 12, Grant gasped. They worked with practiced efficiency, checking his blood pressure, hooking up monitors, starting an IV. The numbers on their equipment painted a grim picture. "BP 190/110, Sarah called to her partner. "EKG shows ST elevation. We need to move." Trevor tried Lydia again as they loaded Grant onto the stretcher. Still no answer. "Is there anyone else we can call?" Sarah asked. "My brother," Grant whispered, giving them Wesley's number. In the ambulance, the world became a blur of sirens and medical equipment. Grant drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the paramedics working to keep him stable. One of them was on the radio with the hospital. "Male, 43, massive MI in progress, ETA 7 minutes. They tried Lydia's number again at 3:02. The call went straight to voicemail. At 3:05, they tried a third time. This time the phone rang, indicating it was active but No one answered. Wesley's voice came through the radio at 3:08. On my way. Do whatever you need to do. Grant coded in the ambulance at 3:12. The world went dark as the paramedics fought to restart his heart. He came back to consciousness just as they wheeled him into Mount Sinai's cardiac unit. 95% blockage in the LAD, he heard a doctor say. Get him to the cath lab immediately. Wesley burst through the emergency room doors at 3:35, still wearing his work clothes, face white with panic. Grant had never been so happy to see his younger brother's worried face. The left anterior descending artery, Dr. Rodriguez explained to Wesley. It's called the widowmaker because most people don't survive when it's completely blocked. Your brother is very lucky. The hospital staff continued trying to reach Lydia. 3:20 p.m., 3:35 p.m., 3:50 p.m. Each call went unanswered. Where is she? Wesley asked, pacing the waiting room. Grant was conscious but groggy after the emergency stent procedure. She's working, Hampton House. I'll keep trying, the nurse said, making another note in the chart. 4:15 p.m., no answer. 4:30 p.m., no answer. 4:45 p.m., no answer. 5:01 p.m., still nothing. Wesley's expression grew darker with each failed attempt. Grant's own wife couldn't be reached during the most critical hours of his life. Where was Lydia? At 2:30 p.m. on March 14th, while Grant was reviewing contracts 43 floors above Manhattan, Lydia was in Dominic Russo's Tribeca apartment. The renovation contractor was everything Grant wasn't. Spontaneous, passionate, unbound by schedules and expectations. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his converted warehouse loft. Lydia felt alive here in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Dominic made her feel desired, not just managed. I can't stay much longer, she murmured, though she made no move to leave. Grant will expect me home eventually. Let him expect, Dominic said, pulling her closer. You're not his property. Lydia's phone, silenced and face down on the nightstand, began lighting up with incoming calls at 2:55 p.m. She noticed the glow, but assumed it was Grant being his usual controlling self. He'd been increasingly clingy lately, asking questions about her schedule, wanting to know details about her projects. The calls kept coming. 3:02 p.m., 3:05 p.m. Each time, Lydia rolled her eyes and ignored them. He's so needy, she complained to Dominic. Always wanting to know where I am, what I'm doing. At 3:30, Lydia finally picked up her phone and typed, without looking at the missed calls. In client meeting, stop calling. She turned the phone face down again and lost herself in the fantasy that this was her real life. That she lived in this airy loft with a man who saw her as more than just a well-dressed accessory to his success. The afternoon stretched on. They ordered wine, talked about the future, made plans for the weekend getaway to the Hamptons, to the house Grant paid for but rarely visited. It wasn't until 5:15 p.m. that Lydia finally checked her voicemail. The first message made her blood freeze. Mrs. Holloway, this is Mount Sinai Hospital. Your husband has been brought to our emergency department with a cardiac emergency. Please call us immediately at... There were 6 more messages, each more urgent than the last. Panic flooded through her as the reality hit. Grant was in the hospital. Had been in the hospital for hours while she was... She couldn't finish the thought. I have to go, she said, grabbing her clothes. Grant's had a heart attack. Dominic barely looked up from his wine. That's rough. Call me tomorrow? Lydia dressed frantically, her mind racing. How would she explain where she'd been? Why hadn't she answered her phone? As she drove toward Mount Sinai, she constructed her story. Showing a house in a dead zone, no cell service, came as soon as she got the messages. She stopped at a red light and applied waterproof mascara, then rubbed some of it away to look like she'd been crying. Perfect, devastated wife, racing to her husband's side. At 5:45 p.m., she called Wesley while still driving. "Wesley, thank God you answered. I just got the message about Grant. I was showing a house in a complete dead zone. No cell service at all. How is he?" Wesley's voice was cold. "He's stable. Where exactly were you showing this house?" "Out in Westchester. The Riverside property. You know how spotty service can be in those areas." She arrived at Mount Sinai at exactly 6 p.m., 3 hours and 13 minutes after Grant's heart attack began. Her performance was flawless. The distraught wife who'd rushed to her husband's side the moment she learned of his condition. But Wesley was watching her carefully, and he noticed things. The revelation. "Where have you been?" Wesley's voice cut through the sterile hospital air like a blade. Lydia turned on the tears she'd practiced in the car. "I was showing the Morrison property in Riverside. You know how dead the cell service is out there. I came the moment I got your message." 7 missed calls, Wesley said quietly. "I saw your phone when you checked it just now. 7 missed calls from the hospital starting at 2:58 p.m. Lydia's stomach dropped, but she maintained her composure. "The phone was in my car. I was walking the property with the clients, showing them the grounds." "Funny thing about that Morrison property," Wesley continued. "I drove past it last week. It's been sold for 6 months. Big sold sign right out front." The lie crumbled before Lydia could construct a new one. She looked around desperately, as if the hospital walls might provide an escape route. "Wesley, Save it." His voice carried a finality that made her flinch. "My brother nearly died today, while you were wherever you really were." Dr. Rodriguez approached them in the ICU waiting area. "Mrs. Holloway, your husband is awake and asking for you." Lydia composed herself, switching back into devoted wife mode. But as they walked toward Grant's room, Wesley stayed close beside her, like a guard dog. Grant looked impossibly pale against the white hospital sheets. Monitors beeped steadily around him, displaying the rhythm of his damaged heart. His eyes tracked to Lydia first, and the heart monitor's rhythm quickened. "Darling," Lydia said, reaching for his hand. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. I was showing that property in Riverside and there was no cell service and—" Grant's grip was weak, but he squeezed her fingers. "You're here now," he whispered. But when he looked at Wesley, Grant's eyes held a question. Wesley gave the slightest shake of his head, and Grant's expression shifted. The heart monitor spiked again. "Maybe we should let him rest," Wesley suggested pointedly. Outside Grant's room, Lydia pulled out her phone to call Chloe. As she scrolled through her contacts, a text notification popped up. "Dom. Hope everything's okay, baby. Can't wait till tomorrow." Wesley saw it. Their eyes met across the phone screen, and Lydia knew her world had just shifted on its axis. "Who's Dom?" Wesley asked quietly. "A contractor. He's working on our Hampton house." Contractors usually don't use fire emojis when texting about work. That night, while Lydia maintained her vigil beside Grant's bed, the night shift nurse made detailed notes in the chart. Keila Baptiste had been a cardiac nurse for 12 years, and she'd seen every type of family crisis. When she overheard Lydia on the phone in the hallway saying, "This is so inconvenient, Dom. I can't just leave him here," Keila added those exact words to her nursing notes, When Lydia complained about the uncomfortable chairs and asked if there was a nearby hotel where she could get some real rest, Keela documented that too. And when Grant's blood pressure spiked every time Lydia touched him, but stabilized when she left the room, Keela made sure those vital signs were thoroughly recorded. Professional observation, she told herself. But really, she was building a case file. Recovery and discovery. 2 weeks after the heart attack, Grant was finally strong enough to have serious conversations. Wesley had been practically living at the hospital, while Lydia's visits became increasingly sporadic. "The doctors say you need complete rest," she announced during one of her brief appearances. "No stress? No excitement? Maybe I should handle all the household decisions for a while." Grant nodded weakly, but his eyes were sharper than his voice suggested. "Whatever you think is best." After Lydia left for another client emergency, Wesley closed the door to Grant's room. "We need to talk," he said. "About the day of your heart attack." "What about it?" Brendan pulled the hospital call logs. "As your medical power of attorney, I had the right to request them." Wesley handed Grant a printed document. "Look at the timeline." Grant studied the records. The first call to Lydia at 2:58 p.m., then 3:02, 3:05, 3:20, 3:35, 3:50, 4:15, 4:30, 4:45, 5 so. 9 calls over 2 hours and 2 minutes. "Her phone was active the whole time," Wesley continued. "The calls were going through, just not being answered. And look at this." He showed Grant a credit card statement Paula had discreetly provided. Hotel charges in Tribeca. Restaurants Grant had never been to. And on March 14th, a charge at 2:15 p.m. from a parking garage 3 blocks from the hospital. "She was in Manhattan the whole time," Grant said quietly. "I hired a private investigator," Wesley admitted. "Just to be sure." "Grant, I'm sorry, but Lydia's having an affair." The monitors around Grant's bed remained steady. Somehow, hearing it confirmed felt less shocking than the wondering had been. How long? At least 2 years. The PI found evidence going back that far. Dominic Russo, he's the contractor who's supposedly renovating your Hampton house. Is he actually doing any renovations? There's no record of any permits pulled for work on your property. No materials delivered. No construction crew. Wesley paused. But there are a lot of hotel receipts. Over the following days, while Grant pretended to rest, Wesley coordinated a thorough investigation. Paula, fiercely loyal after 20 years, helped gather financial records. The PI firm Wesley had hired was discreet but thorough. The evidence painted a devastating picture. Lydia had been systematically siphoning money through fake invoices to her design company. $280,000 over 18 months, filtered through accounts Grant didn't know existed. Text message recovery revealed the depth of her deception. Screenshots of conversations where she called Grant controlling and boring. Messages to Dominic about planning her exit strategy. Plans to file for divorce after Grant's recovery, with her position as the long-suffering wife of a workaholic. "There's something else," Wesley said during one of his evening visits. "The insurance policy she increased 6 months ago? She's the sole beneficiary on the life insurance portion." Grant closed his eyes. "How much?" $5 million. Chloe visited that weekend, her young face drawn with worry. "Dad, is it true what Mom said? That you might not be able to work anymore?" "What exactly did she say?" "That your heart attack was really bad, and you might be disabled. She said we might have to sell the house and change schools." Chloe's voice dropped to a whisper. She seemed almost excited about it. Grant reached for his daughter's hand. "Sweetheart, I'm going to be fine. Better than fine." "Really?" "Because Mom's been packing things. She says she's preparing for changes." That night, Grant made a decision. He was done being the victim of his wife's betrayal. It was time to fight back. The setup. Grant's recovery accelerated once he had a purpose beyond merely surviving. He played the role of weakened husband perfectly while gathering evidence for what his lawyer friends called the nuclear option. "You're looking better," Lydia said during one of her increasingly rare visits. She'd been staying at their apartment in the city, claiming it was easier for hospital visits. In reality, Grant knew she was spending most nights at Dominic's place. "The doctors say recovery will be slow," Grant lied smoothly. "Months before I can work normal hours again." "That's what I've been telling everyone. People are very understanding about your limitations." Grant bit back his response. Instead, he squeezed her hand weakly. "I'm lucky to have you handling everything." Behind the scenes, the investigation was building an airtight case. Brendan Oak, Grant's law school roommate and now Manhattan's most feared divorce attorney, was preparing documentation that would make legal history. "I've seen some cold-blooded stuff in my practice," Brendan told Wesley during one of their strategy meetings. "But abandoning your husband during a heart attack while you're with your lover? That's going to play very badly in court." The PI had captured video evidence of Lydia entering Dominic's building at 2:15 p.m. on March 14th and not leaving until 5:40 p.m. Building security footage, credit card timestamps, phone location data, it all painted the same picture. But the most damaging evidence came from Lydia herself. The recovered text messages revealed not just adultery but fraud. She'd been billing fake design work to cover affair-related expenses. Private investigators found no fewer than 12 phantom clients whose payments had funded hotel rooms and romantic dinners. "She's been living a double life," the lead investigator reported. "Two phones, two sets of friends, two completely different stories about her marriage." Grant learned that Lydia had been telling people he was emotionally abusive and financially controlling. She'd spun herself as the victim of a cold, workaholic husband who ignored her needs. Meanwhile, she was telling Dominic that Grant was basically a roommate and that their marriage had been over for years. The insurance angle proved even more sinister. Records showed Lydia had researched Grant's family medical history extensively before increasing his life insurance. His father had died of a heart attack at 51. His grandfather at 48. "She was betting on your genetics," Wesley said grimly, "and that stress would do the rest." By May, 6 weeks after his heart attack, Grant was medically cleared to return to limited work. His cardiologist was amazed by his recovery. But Grant told Lydia he was still struggling with fatigue and depression. "The doctors think it might be months before I can handle full-time work," he said sadly. "Maybe we should think about downsizing." Lydia's eyes lit up before she caught herself. "Whatever you need, darling. Your health comes first." That evening, she made several phone calls that the PI's phone taps captured. To her divorce attorney, "It's happening faster than we planned." To Dominic, "He's practically an invalid. This couldn't have worked out better." To her bank, "I'd like to discuss transferring some assets to protect them during my husband's medical crisis." Grant listened to the recordings with a mixture of fury and amazement. Even knowing what she was capable of, the depths of her callousness shocked him. "She's moving money into offshore accounts," Brendan reported. "Classic divorce preparation. She's planning to claim you're too disabled to manage finances. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Isabella Russo, Dominic's wife, contacted Wesley directly. "I know what my husband is doing," she said during a clandestine meeting at a Madison Avenue cafe. "I've known for months, but I wanted to see how far it would go." Isabella was old New York money, beautiful and ruthless in the way only the truly wealthy could be. Her family owned half of Midtown Manhattan. "Dominic thinks he's clever," she continued, sipping her espresso with perfect composure. "He has no idea I've been documenting everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, phone records. I own him completely." She slid a thick envelope across the table. "Your brother's wife has been feeding Dominic information about your assets. They're planning to run away together once she gets her divorce settlement." Wesley opened the envelope. Inside were copies of text messages between Lydia and Dominic, detailing Grant's investment portfolio and discussing how to maximize her take from the divorce. "Why are you helping us?" Wesley asked. Isabella's smile was as cold as winter. "Because nobody makes a fool of me, and because I believe in consequences." Grant's trap was now ready to spring. The execution Mother's Day arrived with unseasonably warm weather and Lydia's first genuine surprise in months. She returned from her weekend client consultation to find their house decorated with flowers and balloons. "Welcome home, Mom," Chloe called from the front steps, genuinely excited for the first time in weeks. "What's all this?" Lydia asked, her smile tight with confusion. "Dad planned a surprise party for you," Chloe explained. "All your friends are here, plus Grandma and Grandpa Morrison and some people from your work." Lydia's face went pale. "My work colleagues?" "Everyone who's important to you," Grant said, appearing in the doorway with a walker for show. "I wanted to thank you properly for everything you've done during my recovery." The living room was packed with guests. Lydia's parents had driven down from Connecticut. Her bridge club friends, the country club board members she served with, clients from her interior design business, and several neighbors who thought highly of the Holloway family. Grant had also invited some special guests whose presence Lydia didn't immediately understand. Isabella Russo sat elegantly on the settee, making polite conversation with Lydia's mother. Wesley stood near the fireplace with a laptop computer connected to the large-screen TV. "I'd like to propose a toast," Grant announced, accepting a champagne flute from Chloe. "To my wonderful wife, who has shown her true character during the most difficult period of our marriage." The guests raised their glasses expectantly. Lydia's smile looked painted on. "As many of you know, I suffered a massive heart attack 7 weeks ago. The doctors call it a widowmaker. 95% of people don't survive when the main heart artery is completely blocked." Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the room. Grant continued, his voice growing stronger. "I was unconscious for hours, fighting for my life. During that time, the hospital made desperate attempts to contact my emergency contact, my wife. I'd like to share with you the exact timeline of those calls." Wesley clicked the laptop. The TV screen displayed the hospital call log, time-stamped and official. The first call was made at 2:58 p.m., no answer. The second at 3:02 p.m., still no answer. By 5 p.m., there had been 9 separate attempts to reach Lydia. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Lydia's champagne glass trembled in her hand. "Now, I understand that sometimes people are unreachable, cell phone dead zones, important meetings. But I was curious about where my wife actually was during the most critical hours of my life." Another click. The screen showed a GPS map with a red dot marking Dominic's Tribeca address. According to cell phone location data, Lydia was here, 43 blocks from the hospital. Her phone was active, taking calls and texts from other people. She simply chose not to answer calls from Mount Sinai Hospital. Lydia's mother dropped her champagne glass. The crystal shattered on the hardwood floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. But that's not the most interesting part, Grant continued. At 3:30 p.m. while I was coding in the cardiac unit, Lydia sent me a text message. Would you like to see it? The screen displayed, "In client meeting, stop calling." Gasps and horrified whispers filled the room. Lydia looked around desperately, searching for an exit or explanation. The client she was meeting? Dominic Russo, a contractor who has been renovating more than just our Hampton house. Grant's voice carried no emotion now, just cold facts. Isabella, would you like to share what your husband was renovating that afternoon? Isabella stood gracefully, her voice carrying the authority of generational wealth. My husband was renovating his relationship with Mrs. Holloway. They've been having an affair for 2 years. I have extensive documentation. The party exploded into chaos. Lydia's mother began crying. Her father demanded explanations that didn't come. Friends backed away as if adultery might be contagious. There's more, Grant said, raising his voice above the commotion. While I was fighting for my life, my loving wife was planning her exit strategy. She's stolen $280,000 through fraudulent invoices to her company. She increased my life insurance policy 6 months ago, after researching my family's history of heart disease. The final click showed a series of text messages between Lydia and Dominic, planning their post-divorce life together and calculating how much money they could extract from Grant's inevitable cardiac event. Lydia finally found her voice. This is all lies. Grant is having some kind of breakdown. The heart attack affected his mind. I have sworn affidavits from hospital staff, Grant interrupted. Nurse Keila Baptiste documented your exact words when you complained that my heart attack was inconvenient for your social schedule. Lydia looked around the room one more time, seeing nothing but disgust and betrayal in the faces of people who had once respected her. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and fled. The party dispersed in stunned silence, but not before Grant's message was clear. Consequences were coming. Within hours, Isabella had delivered the same evidence package to Dominic. The contractor arrived home to find his belongings on the sidewalk and divorce papers taped to his door. Isabella's family lawyers moved with the efficiency that only unlimited resources could buy. By Monday morning, Grant had filed for divorce with grounds of adultery, fraud, and abandonment during medical emergency. The temporary restraining order froze all their joint assets and prevented Lydia from accessing any accounts. The forensic accountant Brendan hired found every hidden penny. The IRS received detailed documentation of tax fraud through phantom business expenses. The New York State Bar Association got copies of everything, since several of Lydia's lies involved legal documents and sworn statements. Within a week, Lydia's carefully constructed life was in ruins. The collapse. Lydia's fall from Scarsdale society was swift and total. The story of her abandoning her dying husband spread through their social circles like wildfire, aided by cell phone videos from the Mother's Day party. She's been expelled from the country club board, Wesley reported with grim satisfaction. The hospital charity board voted unanimously to remove her. 3 of her biggest design clients canceled their contracts. Grant was back at work part-time, his recovery remarkable given the severity of his heart attack. His colleagues treated him with newfound respect, not just for surviving but for the methodical way he'd exposed his wife's betrayal. Dominic's situation was even worse. Isabella's family owned the construction company that subcontracted most of his work. Within days, he was blacklisted from every major project in Manhattan. His marriage dissolution included criminal fraud charges related to fake invoices he'd helped Lydia create. Isabella doesn't just divorce, Wesley observed. She destroys. The divorce proceedings began in July. Judge Patricia Hawthorne was known for her no-nonsense approach to matrimonial law, and she'd clearly done her homework on the Holloway case. "Mrs. Holloway," Judge Hawthorne said during the first hearing, "I've reviewed the evidence regarding your whereabouts during your husband's cardiac emergency. Do you have any explanation for ignoring 9 calls from Mount Sinai Hospital?" Lydia's lawyer, a nervous public defender since she could no longer afford Brendan's former partner, tried to deflect. "Your Honor, my client was in shock. Shock that lasted from 2:58 p.m. until 6 p.m., while she was engaged in extramarital activities 43 blocks from the hospital." Wesley took the stand to describe what he'd witnessed that day. His testimony was devastating in its simplicity. "When Lydia finally arrived, I could see 7 missed calls on her phone. She claimed she'd been in a dead zone, but then showed me the missed calls from that same phone. She was lying to my face while my brother was fighting for his life." Nurse Keela's testimony was even more damaging. She read directly from her nursing notes. Patient's wife complained that cardiac emergency was inconvenient and inquired about nearby hotels rather than remaining with critically ill spouse. "In my 12 years as a cardiac nurse," Keela added, "I have never seen a spouse so disconnected from their partner's medical crisis." Chloe, now 17 and surprisingly composed, requested to speak privately with the judge. Her testimony remained sealed, but Judge Hawthorne emerged from chambers with an expression of barely controlled anger. The financial forensics painted a picture of systematic fraud. Lydia had created 12 phantom clients over 18 months, billing Grant's accounts for $280,000 in fake design work. The money had funded hotel rooms, romantic dinners, and a secret apartment in Dominic's name. This wasn't impulsive adultery, the forensic accountant testified. This was a calculated campaign to defraud Mr. Holloway while planning her exit strategy. The insurance angle proved the most damaging aspect. Lydia had increased Grant's life insurance policy after researching his family's cardiac history and calculating the probability of a fatal heart attack before age 50. "She was essentially betting on my death," Grant testified calmly. "And when it almost happened, she was too busy with her lover to answer the phone." The final revelation came from the IRS investigation. Lydia had been filing false tax returns for 2 years, claiming business deductions for personal expenses related to her affair. The criminal charges would likely result in federal prison time. In September, Judge Hawthorne delivered her ruling. Grant received the house, primary custody of Chloe, and most of their assets. Lydia was ordered to pay restitution for the stolen money, plus punitive damages. "In 30 years on the bench," Judge Hawthorne said, "I have never seen such callous disregard for marital vows and basic human decency. Mrs. Holloway's actions during her husband's medical crisis represent a fundamental failure of character that precludes any claim to spousal support." The final twist came when Lydia was required to pay Grant alimony, a symbolic amount, but a powerful reminder of how completely their roles had reversed. Dominic, meanwhile, had fled New York after Isabella's legal team finished with him. Last reports placed him in Florida, working construction under an assumed name while dodging multiple fraud warrants. The aftermath. 1 year after his heart attack, Grant stood at the starting line of the New York City Marathon. At 44, he was in the best shape of his life. 40 pounds lighter, blood pressure normal, resting heart rate of an athlete. "You sure about this?" Wesley asked, adjusting Grant's race number. "The doctor said you could run, not that you should try to break any records." "I'm not trying to break records," Grant replied, checking his GPS watch. "I'm just finishing what I started." Chloe hugged him tight. "I'm proud of you, Dad. For everything. Save the pride for the finish line, kiddo." The race began at dawn. 30,000 runners streaming across the Verrazzano Bridge toward Manhattan. Grant had trained methodically for this moment, the same way he'd approached his divorce, with precision, patience, and absolute determination. Mile by mile, he felt stronger rather than weaker. The cardiac rehabilitation had rebuilt not just his heart, but his entire relationship with physical stress. Where once he'd channeled everything into billable hours and client demands, now he found peace in the rhythm of his footsteps. At mile 13, passing through Queens, he thought about Lydia. Last he'd heard, she was working as a junior designer for one of her former competitors, making 1/10 of her previous income. The criminal charges had resulted in probation and community service, but the social exile was permanent. Dominic had disappeared completely. Even Isabella's investigators couldn't locate him, though she seemed satisfied that his construction career was permanently finished. At mile 20, Grant's phone buzzed with a text from Keela. "Watching online tracker. You're amazing. Dinner tonight?" Their relationship had developed slowly, built on the foundation of shared truth rather than comfortable lies. Keela understood exactly what Grant had survived, both medically and emotionally. She'd been there for the worst day of his life and stayed for the recovery. The final 6 miles through Manhattan passed in a blur of cheering crowds and familiar landmarks. Grant's pace never wavered. He'd calculated his target time precisely and hit every split within seconds. As he turned the corner into Central Park, Grant could see the finish line ahead. Wesley, Chloe, and Keela were waiting in the family section, holding signs and cheering. He crossed the finish line at exactly 3:47:22, the same time Lydia had finally arrived at the hospital 1 year earlier. "How do you feel?" the race photographer asked as Grant received his medal. "Like I can survive anything," Grant replied. That evening, at the same restaurant where he'd once entertained clients with 7-figure deals, Grant knelt beside Keela's chair. The engagement ring, a simple, elegant solitaire, caught the candlelight perfectly. "I know this might seem fast," he said, "but I've learned that life can change in an instant. When you find someone who shows up during the worst moments, you don't let them go." Keela's tears were genuine, unlike the performed emotion Grant had lived with for so long. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely." From across the restaurant, Grant noticed a familiar figure sitting alone at the bar. Lydia, wearing clothes that were once designer but now looked worn, watching them through the reflection in the bar mirror. For a moment their eyes met. Grant felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no regret. Just the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the worst betrayal possible and built something better from the wreckage. Lydia looked away first, paid her bill, and disappeared into the New York night. Grant turned back to Keela, to his brother, to his daughter, to the people who had chosen to show up when it mattered most. The restaurant was full of laughter and celebration, the sound of a life rebuilt on foundations solid enough to last. The heart of the matter. 18 months after his heart attack, Grant stood in the same cardiac unit where he'd nearly died. But this time, he was wearing a tuxedo instead of a hospital gown, and the room was decorated with flowers instead of medical equipment. "Are you sure you want to do this here?" Keela asked, adjusting his boutonniere. "Some people might think it's morbid." "This is where we met," Grant replied. "Where I learned who really mattered. It's perfect." The wedding ceremony was small, just family and the friends who had proven themselves during the crisis. Wesley served as best man, while Chloe walked Keela down the aisle. Dr. Rodriguez, who had saved Grant's life, performed the ceremony as an ordained minister. "Marriage," Dr. Rodriguez said in his opening remarks, "is about showing up when everything goes wrong, not just when everything goes right." Grant's vows were simple. "Keela, you saw me at my absolute worst and chose to stay. You documented the truth when lies were easier. You showed up every day, especially the days when showing up was hard. I promise to do the same for you, for as long as my rebuilt heart keeps beating." Keela's response was equally direct. "Grant, you taught me that crisis reveals character. You turned betrayal into truth, bitterness into strength. I promise to be the person who answers when you call, who shows up when you need me, who chooses us even when it's inconvenient." The reception was held in the hospital's charity ballroom, the same space where Grant and Lydia had attended countless fundraisers as the perfect couple. But this celebration felt completely different, genuine rather than performed, intimate rather than impressive. "Speech time," Wesley announced, tapping his champagne glass. Grant stood, looking around at the faces of people who had earned their place in this room through loyalty rather than social obligation. 2 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. Perfect marriage, perfect family, perfect life. Then my heart stopped beating for 47 seconds, and I learned the difference between having everything and having what matters." He raised his glass toward Keela. "To second chances, honest hearts, and people who show up." The toast was interrupted by Chloe, now a freshman at Columbia on full academic scholarship. "Dad, there's something I want to say." She stood with the poise of someone who had grown up fast but remained undamaged by the experience. Most kids would be traumatized by watching their parents' marriage explode. But watching Dad handle it taught me what real strength looks like. Not the fake perfection Mom was always performing, but the courage to face ugly truths and build something better. She turned to Keela. "And thank you for showing me what a real partnership looks like. For proving that some people actually mean their promises." Later, as the reception wound down, Grant found himself alone for a moment on the hospital balcony overlooking Central Park. The same view he'd seen from his recovery room window, but now it looked different. Less like a world he was watching from the outside, more like a place where he belonged. His phone buzzed with a notification, a social media alert he hadn't requested. Somehow, Lydia's Instagram account was still suggesting itself to him. Curious despite himself, he glanced at her latest post. It was a photo of a small apartment, carefully staged to look artistic rather than cramped. The caption read, "New chapter, new opportunities. Sometimes life takes you in unexpected directions. Blessed new beginnings, finding myself." The comments were sparse and clearly from people who didn't know her story. Grant almost felt sorry for her, still performing for an audience that didn't exist, still crafting a narrative where she was the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own destruction. He deleted the app entirely and went back inside to find his wife. The final dance was to the same song Grant and Lydia had danced to at their wedding 18 years earlier. But everything about this moment was different. Keela was present in ways Lydia had never been, engaged rather than distracted, choosing this moment rather than enduring it. "Any regrets?" she asked as they swayed together. Grant considered the question seriously. "About the heart attack? The divorce? The pain? Any of it?" "No," he said finally. "All of it led to this. To you. To knowing the difference between being married and being partnered. Even if you could go back and prevent it all? Especially then. Some things are worth the price you pay to learn them." As the evening ended and guests began to leave, Grant noticed that several hospital staff members had stayed to watch from the sidelines. The cardiac unit was working its usual life and death shifts, but the nurses and doctors had taken breaks to witness this particular celebration. "It gives us hope," Nurse Keela's former supervisor explained. "We see so much trauma, so much loss. Sometimes we need to be reminded that people can come back stronger." Grant understood. His story had become part of the hospital's folklore. Not the medical miracle of surviving a widowmaker heart attack, but the human miracle of rebuilding a life from complete betrayal. As he and Keela left for their honeymoon, Grant took one last look at the cardiac unit where everything had changed. The monitors still beeped, the staff still rushed between rooms. The machinery of modern medicine continued its endless battle against death and disease. But now Grant knew something he hadn't understood during his first stay. Sometimes the heart needs to stop beating for a person to truly come alive. The new Mr. and Mrs. Holloway walked out into the New York night, two people who had found each other in the wreckage of crisis and built something that would last. Behind them, the hospital continued its work of saving lives, while ahead of them stretched a future built on the solid foundation of truth, loyalty, and love that shows up when showing up matters most. In the end, Grant realized, his heart attack had been the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because he'd enjoyed nearly dying, but because dying had taught him how to live.